This episode of Creating a New Healthcare is a bit different. Uh, joining me today is Jess Greenwood, who is my colleague and producer. We've been working together for years on the podcast and the books. And a couple of weeks ago, Jess, who had been listening and editing all of the interviews, said something new and different to me. And she started to remark how the while the episodes and what people were doing were really fascinating, interesting. Um, it was fundamentally the stuff behind it was kind of boring, the technology and all this sort of stuff. And I'll let her explain it, but I thought it was such a great perspective that I wanted her to join me today and kind of talk about this because I think there's something there to discuss and I think it there's a trend here that is emerging. So, Jess, without further ado, um, what did you say to me a couple of weeks ago that led to us having this discussion?
Yeah, well, and first of all, Zev, as always, I'm so appreciative anytime you take what could have been seen as criticism as actually constructive, and maybe something we should explore further.
Jess,
Something,
I'm used to you telling me I'm boring.
but not the guests, right? Usually I don't go that far.
No.
And the guests are certainly not boring, but what I was sort of picking up on, and for the listening audience, my background is in direct patient care. I was a genetic counselor and then moved into the industry space. And for a long time, the podcast was really focused on how to change care delivery, how to change direct patient care, how to change the interactions and the experience, how to make them more human. And over the past season or two, I feel like what we've really been hearing more of in the innovations that we've been featuring are
Mhm.
innovations focused on technology. They're focused on billing or on medical claims or on health insurance or on employee-based insurance. And, after you listen to four or five of those, you're kind of like, good Lord, can we get back to the patient care stuff, the stuff that makes your heart, go like this? But I
Right.
brought that up to you because the more and more I listen to those episodes, I'm like, I really hope
Yeah.
people are getting how critical it is that we change the infrastructure. So, I wanted to hop on with you and just talk a little bit about why do you think we're seeing this trend away from innovations that are really focused directly on care delivery and more focused on how do we deal with kind of the broken part of the infrastructure of the system?
Yeah. So I'm just going to come out swinging, Jess, because it's not
Okay.
like it's not like your comment has kept me up all night for the last 2 or 3 weeks. Nothing like that. But no, here's a couple of quick thoughts. First of all, in the second book that I wrote and that you edited, Beyond the Walls, you know what I outlined there was what I had been seeing happen over and over again in the industry. The people who were changing healthcare had the same formula, the same strategy. It was this humanistic vision, changing the experience and outcomes of care in a humanistic way, attacking ageism and sexism, and racism and classism. But the enablers were digital technology and business model transformation. You
Hmm.
cannot change healthcare without doing those three things. That I saw that over and over again over the past few years, interviewing hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs and leaders who are really, really changing healthcare, not just propagating it, not just improving it slightly, but really changing it. And so what you reminded me was, well, if you break that down, digital technology and business model transformation, those are not sexy things. To your
No.
point, that doesn't get your blood going. But digital technology and business model transformation, yeah, those are what transform. That's how healthcare is going to be transformed,
Mm.
in the way that it has to be. And again, in a sustained, scalable way. Now you could have pockets of care without that. But if you really want to transform American healthcare, that's the formula, and it's not sexy. So that's point number one. That was my first
That
punch,
was your
right?
right hook.
Right hook. Whatever. Um, and the second follow-up is that you know what's sexy? Um, Success is sexy.
Mm,
Outcomes are sexy. And I'm attracted to that. As you know very well, because we've been talking about this quite a bit, our focus is not on just thought leadership, it's not on ideas, it's not just on policy. Our focus in the podcast is what are people actively doing, deploying right now in the market, in the industry that is actually creating a positive change, that is actually showing outcomes and successful outcomes in terms of humanizing healthcare. I think that's sexy. And so,
mhm.
although how you get there, talking about artificial intelligence or, you know, talking about benefits plan design, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you. I mean, I have to like pin my eyes open when people start talking about some of this stuff too. But having said that, what they're doing with that, and thank
Mm.
God, I mean, it's kind of like the nerds are taking over healthcare, and I am for one delighted by that because it has to be taken over. It has to be transformed. I mean, you know as well as I do, for the past few decades. I mean, we've been talking. Everyone's talking a big game about improving healthcare. All I know is that healthcare is more costly, less accessible, and it's just as inequitable as it's ever been, if not more so. And we're really about to fall off a cliff in many ways in healthcare, and people are just beginning to realize that. So we need this. If what it takes is dry, boring, unsexy stuff, then just bring it on because that's what we need.
I think one of the pieces that it feels boring, though, is because we're also talking about the complexity of the healthcare system. So, I told you we recorded an episode of the over the summer, and I told you I went back and listened to it 4 times, and it was only on the fourth time where I was like, "Oh my God, this is transformative," and I finally get why. And I mean, I've been in healthcare for 20 plus years, but it
Yeah.
took really listening to kind of the intricacies of what that transformation was in order to be able to
Mhm.
figure out like why is this going to do something. And
And
so I'd
just
love, yeah,
just for the listeners, so we interviewed David Chase over the
yep,
summer, the CEO of Health Rosetta, the founder of Health Rosetta. The topic was employer-sponsored healthcare plans and benefits, and he's an expert. He's been doing this for at least a decade, and he was discussing the construction of value-based fiduciary employer-sponsored healthcare benefits plans. Just saying that
right,
almost puts me to sleep. But
yeah.
when you listen to it, you're like, I have no idea what he's talking about. It is such
Well, and
a
he was talking about his new platform, Nautilus, right? Which is really designed to leverage AI and transparency to make the contracts more transparent. And that was the part where I was getting so hemmed up. I'm like, I don't get it. Like, why is it so important? Who cares what's in your contract? Like, don't you
yes.
know what's in your contract? And his point was that information has been stonewalled. It has been behind a wall, literally,
Hmm.
for a
Hmm.
long period of time. And they have been kind of piecing together this data that now can be scraped and can show an employer this is where you can actually leverage your negotiating power. But until I put all of those pieces together,
Together.
I'm
Yeah.
like, I just don't get it. Like, why is it such a big deal? And so I think there's something about the complexity of the problem that
Yeah.
maybe is really important to talk about as well.
Well, yes. Uh, and one of the reasons we've kind of changed the format is to try to make it less complex and stay at a higher level. But let's just stay with David Chase for a second. So here's his big aha, and the big message there is that the devil is in the details. If you want to transform employer-based healthcare, and lower costs dramatically, improve outcomes, improve the patient experience, you have to focus on the contracts that employers sign with their through their benefits plans with their payers, et cetera. I mean, again, how boring. And yet that's the key to
Mhm.
transforming American healthcare through the employer-based space, which makes up over 40% of American healthcare. I think that aha, I mean, if the way to transform a healthcare is that boring, then by God, let's just be boring. And, again, focus on nothing more unsexy and dry than the contracts. But you know what's really shocking is maybe this is my final punch. Maybe this is maybe this is maybe this is the message, is that we've been so focused on all the, kind of fun stuff and sexy stuff. And, maybe what we need to focus on is what happens in the back room, what happens in the business room, what happens in HR, what happens in the finance rooms. Maybe we need to unlock those doors, walk behind what happens in the clinical side of the house into that side, because that, I believe, is fundamentally what has stonewalled the transformation and the humanization of American healthcare. And I think that's what you're seeing happen in the podcast, is we are literally saying, I get it, what's happening up front in patient care, obviously the most important part, but we got to go open those doors. We got to open up the CFO's doors and the HR doors, and the tech doors and all those doors. We got to go there and start talking to those folks, because that's what's going to allow us to enable us to transform healthcare.
Yeah, and I think that some of the themes that were really coming out that we have heard from those episodes are the importance of transparency in contracting and how non-transparent they have been to date. Just shockingly so in some cases. And it's really hard to negotiate if you don't even know what's in your contract. And I think that is really important. But the other piece that has really come out is, how do we use AI for the good guys? And we've seen
Mm,
that. We saw that with Neil Shaw. We're seeing that with Steve Brown. We've seen that in a couple of episodes here where it's like, hey, look, AI, we can, the good guys can use AI too, right? And not to sort of pit against sides, good guys and bad guys, but to say, like, there's no reason why we can't make AI work for the patient or for the caregiver or for the provider or for the practice. And so we're seeing, these
mm,
entrepreneurs and innovators taking this tool that really has historically been used in the infrastructure, really not
mm,
to the advantage of the patient or the caregiver or the provider or the practice, and bringing that power back. And so it's boring in how it works, but its goal seems to still be that same goal of humanizing healthcare, of making it more transparent, accessible, affordable, all of those things. But you got to get through the boring stuff to get to that part.
So very specifically, you mentioned two things. Neil Shaw, who is a finance guy and a technology guy, and he created a company called Counterforce recently, and it's unbelievably brilliant. So patients are denied um, the approval of diagnostic tests and procedures by the insurance companies. This is very common and it's very significant. And those denials are generated by mathematical models, by now artificial intelligence enabled computer algorithms. And what he's done, so you've got this army of robots, AI saying, no, you can't, we're not going to pay for this procedure. Go ahead and fight us. And again, the AI generates that in milliseconds. The human being on the other end of that has to, whether you're a patient, a caregiver, or doctor, nurse, administrator, hours and hours of work to counter that. And so what he said is, well, I'm going to create AI that counters the AI used by the insurance companies to deny. And literally, what would take a doctor or a nurse or someone else, a patient, hours, his AI can do in seconds. And so now you've got this AI war, which is, I mean, if you think about it, it's actually pretty cool on that level. But more importantly, it's really enabling patients to get the care that they need and deserve. And we know that they need and deserve it because, as Neil points out, and he wrote a book about this, Neil Shaw, Counterforce, he wrote a book about it, that the majority of denials, when they're fought, they get approved in the end.
I agree with you. And honestly, like, I remember when I felt like my job largely became writing letters of medical necessity,
Mm,
because so much of getting care for patients with rare diseases has to do with getting through the insurance. I called it the labyrinth, if you remember that movie from the 80s. Like I felt like I was
Yeah.
stuck in the
Yeah.
labyrinth of insurance, health insurance. So I directly connected with that episode. But when you think about medical claims in general, like not a really exciting topic. I also feel
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
but it is a probably billion, I don't know, but multi-million dollar business on the back end to be able to deny these claims because that's how they keep
Oh,
insurers from
it's
having to pay it out. And
I'm
so if
sure
you
it's
think about it,
billions.
if you think about it, it's like, yeah, it's not direct patient care. And so it doesn't, have the tug on your heartstrings in the same way. But if
Hmm.
you can use AI to generate a letter of medical necessity or, a claim denial or claim appeal in seconds, like that's a
Hmm.
pretty big deal, especially for a
Hmm.
patient who has a chronic condition who's dealing with this over and over and over and over again.
Right. And then you mentioned the other one, which was Steve Brown from who created CureWise. Again, at its surface, it's pretty boring. It's basically just taking these AI models to help figure out, diagnose, different types of cancers and other diseases, and then, what medications are optimal and but it actually blew me away, to be honest with you. Here's a guy, and 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 you and I've talked about this. One of the things that often drives these very kind of boring situations is people's own personal experience. Neil Shah,
Hmm.
who we were just talking about, had a very, very personal experience with his wife who got sick, very sick with cancer, and he literally just changed his entire career, his entire life to focus on healthcare, out of coming away from the finance industry that he was in. Um, and then Steve Brown was a filmmaker, and again, also had an personal, experience with cancer, and that was misdiagnosed or not diagnosed for a year or so. And he just said, "Well, maybe AI can help me." What was really cool about what he did, which I'd never heard of before, is he didn't just go to ChatGPT. He took all the models out there and he put them together and he said, okay, I want you all to work together, all these different large language models. And then so that was one thing he did, which was wild. The second thing he did, which was wild, was instead of asking a question, he said, I'm going to create different personas. So I want a
Hmm.
team of advisors, an intelligence team of advisors. You all have a different point of view. And so I'm going to have a cardiologist and a neurologist, an endocrinologist and an oncologist, on and on, a pharmacologist. I want you all, these are all AI created personas. I want you to go out into the literature and debate with each other what is the most optimal diagnosis. I had never heard of that before. And, here's a guy, again, boring, analytic, blah, 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 technical, but mind blowing. And again, more importantly, he's discovered a way to actually help people, again, help their doctors as well, diagnose illnesses that are very, very hard to diagnose, customize illnesses that are pretty rare, figure out what's the best treatment, what's the best medication plan, what do you have to stay away from, just stuff that would be really, really difficult, if not impossible, to do without that AI enablement. So again, even as I'm talking, it's starting to sound more boring, but it's amazing, right? It's really transforming healthcare. I think, I don't like to make predictions, but just I think 5 years from now, it's going to be unrecognizable in terms of what the technology is going to do. Plus, as we shift away from purely fee for service, the predominant fee for service, which we know is not consistent with the preventive kind of proactive care that most of us want. It's great that we have tertiary quaternary care, but we're not spending enough money, not nearly enough money or attention or resources to preventing disease. And so I think that is really the next frontier in healthcare, is really customizing, personalizing, and preventing, as opposed to waiting until I have that stroke or have that heart attack and then doing space age technology to fix me. I want that, but I much prefer a couple of cents on the dollar being spent on prevention first.
So with that mentality, that proactive space as opposed to kind of a reactive mentality, what would you recommend people listen for in these episodes? What obviously we're trying to give them the details about what these companies do and what they are, but is there, are there themes? Are there certain details? Are there things across all of these episodes you would encourage people to really be paying attention for?
Well, I think you listen to these episodes more than I do because you have to edit them. So I don't know how many times you listen to them. So I'm curious what you think people should listen for. I'll answer my question, which is, what I think the most important thing people could do who are listening is actually share it. The point of this is not just to inform people. The point is when you hear Anil Shah, do whatever you can to get his company known, get it in front of people, get it in front of, your colleagues, get it in front of healthcare systems. Um, Most provider groups and hospitals really could use his technology, and so I really think it's a responsibility. Everyone talks about wanting to change healthcare, but you actually can do something about it. So these episodes, the Steve Brown, these others, each one of them, put it out there on social media, send it to your doctors, send it to your health. If you're in a healthcare system, bring it to your senior leadership. I mean, that's the whole point of why I'm doing this is I'm trying to showcase this so that we can actually adopt this. That's the way we're going to transform healthcare. But what do you think people should listen to?
It's interesting. As I've been listening to these past episodes, I feel like I'm back in college and where I would
Hmm.
take like the first test in the fall semester and really not know what I was doing. I memorized the information, I did all the studying, and I probably had like a 60% knowledge of it. And I was just kind of praying for the B, But by the time I got to the final exam and I reviewed all of the information in aggregate, I really felt like I had a solid understanding of the material. So I actually think it's important to listen to each episode and then, go on a binge fest when you've got that 8-hour drive and listen to them back to back. Because when I have done that, obviously that's part of my job, but the themes become so much more, relatable. They really pop out at me. I start to really see that there's a direction that we're going when we're trying to transform healthcare. It's a lot easier for me to pick up on, what are the types of technologies that we are utilizing? Where are the real sweet spots where we can make the biggest difference? So,
Mhm.
not to give our listeners homework, but I would say, listen once, but then maybe come back and listen again when you've got some time because I do think that that aggregate is how we take that like really complex and boring piece of it and make it be like, oh my God, I get it. And that's a big deal.
What are we going to call this episode? This I'm like trying to think. Healthcare transformation is boring, but that's the solution, or it really is. I tell you that metaphor, that visualization, you got me going on this. That visualization of going behind the patient rooms and really knocking on the finance doors and the HR doors and the informatics doors, the legal doors, and saying, "Hey, no, no, enough of this. We have to see what's actually going on in healthcare." I tell you, I really think that is the boring is the transformation. The transformation in American healthcare is boring, and we really need to explore that because it's the stuff that happens. You could say whatever you want, put whatever you want on the side of buses or billboards or, media, but it's really the devil's in the detail. The devil is in, your financial arrangements. The devil is in your legal arrangements. And the devil is how you pay your people, how you bonus your people. I mean, you've heard me say, I think what would transform American healthcare quicker than anything else is to show how executives in every sector of American healthcare, how they get bonused, just
Hmm.
how they making their money. Because that will tell you what we're doing, and that will tell you what we need to do to change healthcare. So I don't know. What do you think? What do we call this discussion?
Well, I'm one for brevity, so I'm down. I'm just trying to think of a B synonym for transparent, but I can just go with boring is beautiful. But I think it's true because if you think about, we also have really tried hard to parallel this to our own individual lives and our own individual health and wellness journeys. And if you think about it, like when you're kind of out in the world and you're going to the gym every day, and maybe you're eating what you should, but like your finances are out of control, you're spending beyond your means, you're overcard, overhoused, over all of those things, like that doesn't help you either. And then when you get into those details, when you are boring with your finances, when you are boring with your healthcare, when you eat exactly, how many nutritionists have we talked to that are like, listen, this isn't rocket science. You got to eat vegetables and fruits. You got to put all those on your plates. We keep looking for something that's more profound than that. It's not. You've got to exercise more than you sit. There's so many of these pieces where boring just is the
Well,
answer.
so for folks who are listening, the reason Jess is talking about this is we actually do have a health and wellness what's the word
Living Well series.
series. Yeah, so we have a Living Well series, and we are interviewing nutritionists and experts in wellness, and it's important. It's been a big part of both of our lives. Jess, it was interesting because I was up at the gym very early this morning, and there is nothing sexy about working out. It's
No.
especially not, before the sun rises. It's about the most unsexy thing in the world. It's boring as all hell, lifting iron and steel, and but what is sexy is the outcomes. That's what's really important. And again, I think it just kind of goes back to what you and I've been talking about. Boring is beautiful in the transformation of American healthcare.
Well, I think we got the title.
There you go.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Zev. I really, yeah, I really appreciate,
Thank
I
you.
think it's it's such an important conversation. I think we have talked a lot about how important discussion and conversation is in the world right now, and continuing to be able to just talk about hard topics. And it's the rare boss who will take someone saying, "Hey, look, I think your work is boring," and see that as an opportunity. So I really
Are
appreciate
you
that.
are you just on the record admitting that I'm your boss? Is that because it doesn't really feel that way
Maybe just for this conversation.
for the public.
For the listening public.
Yes. Well, as your boring boss, I just want to thank you. This has been a real fun conversation.